We have all felt it. That quiet nagging feeling that we should be doing something else. That important task sits on our list, and instead of starting, we find a million other things to do. We check our email. We scroll through our phones. We tidy a desk that is already clean. And as the hours pass, a heavier feeling sets in. We call it procrastination. But often, what we are really feeling is shame. We tell ourselves we are lazy. We believe we lack willpower. We think if only we tried harder, this would all be so much easier. This internal voice can be harsh, a relentless critic that lives inside our own minds. This shame, however, does not motivate us. It does the opposite. Imagine you are trying to coax a frightened animal out of hiding. Would you yell at it? Would you tell it that it is weak and foolish for being scared? Of course not. You would use a calm voice. You would be patient. You would create a sense of safety. Our brains are not so different. When we attack ourselves with shame and criticism for not working, our brain perceives this as a threat. To understand this signal, we need to take a quiet journey inside the brain. Think of your mind as having two key players who are often in conflict. The first is a very old, very powerful part of your brain called the limbic system. It is the seat of your emotions. It is the seat of your memories. It is the seat of your survival instincts. Deep within this system is a small, almond-shaped structure called the amygdala. The amygdala is your brain's watchman. It is constantly scanning your environment, both internal and external, for any sign of danger. Its job is simple and crucial: to keep you safe from harm by sounding the alarm at the first hint of a threat. The second player is much newer in evolutionary terms. It is your prefrontal cortex, located right behind your forehead. This is the sophisticated, logical part of your brain. It is the chief executive, the CEO of your mind. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for planning. It is responsible for making complex decisions. It is responsible for regulating your emotions. It is responsible for focusing your attention. It knows the long-term benefits of finishing that difficult report. It knows the value of studying for that important exam. It is the voice of reason. It sets goals and works steadily to achieve them, even when the work is not immediately rewarding. These two parts are in a constant conversation. Usually, they work together quite well. The prefrontal cortex can calm the amygdala, assuring it that a stressful situation is manageable. However, the connection is not always balanced. The amygdala is wired for speed. It can react to a perceived threat in milliseconds, long before the slower, more deliberate prefrontal cortex fully processes the situation. This is a survival advantage. If a car suddenly swerves into your lane, you do not want your brain analyzing vectors and velocity. You want it to react instantly. The problem arises when the amygdala treats modern, abstract tasks like life or death threats. A blank page, a difficult conversation, a complex project, all can trigger the same alarm bells as a predator in the wild. When the amygdala perceives a task as threatening, perhaps because it is overwhelming, we fear failure, or we have been shamed about it before. It can hijack the brain's response system. It floods the body with stress hormones. It screams one primal command: avoid this. This is the beginning of the internal battle we call procrastination. When the amygdala sounds the alarm, it triggers a cascade of chemical changes in your body. This is the classic fight-or-flight response. Your brain believes you are in danger, and it prepares you to either confront the threat or run away from it. One of the primary chemicals released during this process is a hormone called cortisol. In a true survival situation, cortisol is incredibly useful. It sharpens your senses. It increases the sugar in your bloodstream for a quick energy boost. It diverts resources away from non-essential functions like digestion. It prepares your body for immediate physical action. But what happens when the perceived threat is not a tiger in the grass, but a tax return on your desk? The cortisol still floods your system. Your heart rate might increase. Your muscles may tense. You feel a sense of unease. You feel anxiety. This is the amygdala hijack in action. Your body is primed for a physical escape, but the task requires mental focus and calm deliberation. the very chemical that would save you from a physical predator now works directly against you. So how do we calm this internal alarm and get started? The answer lies in a concept from physics that applies beautifully to human psychology: activation energy. Imagine a very large, heavy boulder sitting on the ground. The most difficult part of moving that boulder is getting it to budge in the first place. It requires a significant initial push of force to overcome its inertia. Once it begins to roll, however, it takes far less energy to keep it moving. The same principle applies to our brains when we face a daunting task. The initial step feels like the hardest part. This initial burst of effort needed to transition from avoidance to action is the activation energy of a task. When we procrastinate, it's often because the perceived activation energy is too high. The task looks like a giant boulder, and we feel we don't have the strength to make that first push. The amygdala flags this as a costly, threatening expenditure of energy. So our brain defaults to the path of least resistance, continuing to do nothing, doing something easier and more immediately rewarding. The secret isn't superhuman strength. It's lowering that initial activation energy. Section 5. Protocols for a distracted world. Time boxing and Pomodoro. Once you have overcome that initial inertia, the next challenge is to maintain focus in a world that is designed to shatter it. Notifications, emails, social media updates, all engineered to provide quick, easy hits of dopamine, a chemical associated with pleasure and reward. These digital temptations make slow, deep work feel even more difficult by comparison. Our brains, which evolved to seek out rewards, are easily lured away from a challenging task by the promise of an immediate, effortless dopamine fix. To counteract this, we need to create structure. We need focus protocols. One of the most effective protocols is called time boxing. It is a simple method of scheduling where you allocate a specific, fixed period of time to a single task. Instead of an open-ended goal like work on the presentation, you create a concrete appointment with yourself. This simple act of putting a boundary around the work changes everything. A similar and very popular technique is the Pomodoro technique, developed by Francesco Cirillo. The method is beautifully simple, and work on that task with absolute focus until the timer rings. Then you take a short 5-minute break. This rhythm of short, intense sprints, followed by deliberate rest, is incredibly well suited to our brain's natural capacity for attention. We have discussed the brain's internal mechanics and the external structures we can build to support our focus. But there is one more ingredient, and it may be the most important of all: kindness. In one key study, researchers found that students who were encouraged to forgive themselves for procrastinating on studying for an exam were less likely to procrastinate on their next one. Those who didn't forgive themselves kept delaying. This kind, honest approach lets the prefrontal cortex come back online. When you are not in high alert, you can see the situation more clearly and problem solve. Combine self-compassion with a tiny, actionable step. Soothe the alarm system first, then give the rational brain a small, manageable task to execute. This builds resilience, not resistance. Join the NeuroPulse community to master your focus and optimize your potential. Subscribe and pulse with clarity.